Hey guys, what's up? Shadowlands back for another video. Today I wanted to talk about the meta of Destiny. I'm going to start off with a brief history, but the reason I wanted to make this video is because Destiny has seen a lot of different metas throughout its time. We have seen it do a complete 180, upside down, backwards, and sideways. Its meta has never been clearly defined, except at certain points. And these certain points are the exact kind of things that I think a game should not have. Now, we've since progressed since then, but I want to go over a very brief history of what the meta of Destiny has been before we get into the main topic. When the game first released, anyone who had the Vex Mythic class from the Vault of Glass hard mode raid, who was lucky enough to get it to drop, I think it was like a 1% chance if you beat Atheon, it was the absolute dominator of Crucible. You could basically 41 damage headshot someone at very long ranges with low recoil. You could absolutely melt people. That gun held the meta for the first month and a half of the game. Next up came the Suros regime, and now really this was auto rifles in general being overpowered, but one stood among the rest, and that was the Suros regime. This thing where if you were on the bottom half of your magazine and started doing damage, you could restore a bit of your health. It was an incredibly overpowered assault rifle that would just do unreal amounts of damage over a short amount of time. It did something like 38 damage a headshot, even very long ranges, and also had very low recoil, so it was super easy to manage. Just incredibly overpowered. After that, we had quite a long era where fusion rifles were just terribly overpowered. It didn't matter what fusion rifle you used, although one of the most popular ones was Plan C. In fact, Plan C hasn't even received that much of a nerf. It's still pretty overpowered if you use it, although you don't see it as used much anymore just because of other reasons that I'll get into in a minute. But fusion rifles were, during this era, were incredibly overpowered. It was prior to the Dark Below. It was basically the rest of, I would say it started in early November and went all the way until like mid-January when the Dark Below came out. Then we had this long era where shotguns dominated Crucible, and the reason that they dominated for so long, all the way up until House of Wolves came out, so about 4 months of solid shotgun play, was because they tried nerfing them 2 or 3 different ways in that time period, but they were never nerfed enough, so shotguns were just incredibly overpowered. Didn't matter which one you used, although the most popular one was called Fellwinter's Lie. There were also 2 other quite popular ones, one called the Party Crasher, and one called the Secret Handshake. That was one that was held onto from the original release of Destiny. Everyone who still had a Secret Handshake was quite popular around that time just to use that weapon. Anyway, then we had the House of Wolves. All throughout House of Wolves, there was only one setup that people used in Trials of Osiris and a lot of competitive game modes. Either the Thorn or the Hawkmoon, preferably the Thorn, the Fellwinter's Lie, and then either a Party Crasher or a Fellwinter's, one of those really powerful shotguns that could consistently one-shot, or the Matador 64. One of those 3 were very, very popular, but Fellwinter's was the one everyone wanted to use. And then some sort of rocket launcher. Now, the real kicker here was anyone who still had a Fellwinter's Lie from the Dark Below DLC like I did, had a particularly nice roll on it. You could get rangefinder and shot package. That combination was the deadliest thing, and they removed it for the House of Wolves Fellwinter's Lie. They didn't never put it back, and I'm glad they didn't because shotguns were just not fun. People were jokingly calling it Fellwinter's sniper rifle. And the rocket launcher, it didn't matter what rocket launcher you had as long as it was one of the archetype that had very high velocity, very high blast radius, because you would try to get tripod and grenades and horseshoes. Tripod so that when you picked up heavy ammo, all 3 of your shots would be in your magazine and you would not need to reload. But then also grenades and horseshoes, because back in the day when it was overpowered, it would basically, you could just shoot anywhere near your opponent. You wouldn't even have to come close to hitting them, and it would still kill them. It was an incredibly overpowered build, and pretty much anyone who rocked that was guaranteed to win. It was like, I think like 70% of people were rocking a build similar to that. And anyway, that carried it all the way until the end of Year 1 on Destiny. Now, Year 2 comes around. So far, we have only really seen 2, quote, metas. The first one, which is kind of on the declining edge, but not because of a patch, surprisingly, is the Mida multi-tool meta right now. It's still technically there, but people are seeming to shy away from it, and I'll get into that in just a minute. But currently, or at least for a while, the meta was to have a Mida multi-tool, a 1,000-yard stare, and a raid machine gun. Now, a lot of people would argue that this meta is still here, because we have not had a patch since, and, you know, it's just still used quite a bit. Now, I'm going to argue that that meta is sort of on the dying edge for a couple of reasons. One, The Mida multi-tool is a scout rifle. A lot of people are not comfortable using scout rifles in PvP just because they require more skill to use than a lot of other primary weapons. Hand cannons probably being tied up there. Auto rifles don't require a lot of skill. It's a spray and play sort of deal. Pulse rifles aren't far from that, especially if they have the full auto ability. Now, if we go back and look at scout rifles require a lot of precision, a lot of patience, and a lot of really steady handwork. So they're not really quite as popular, or at least in terms of being used as a weapon archetype. Now that Mida multi-tool is a scout rifle, we also have the 1,000-yard stare and the raid machine gun to talk about. The 1,000-yard stare, it serves a purpose where it's a very high damage with a relatively high fire rate sniper rifle, but the thing is, a lot of sniper rifles can fill the role that you need to in Crucible. You might see 1,000-yard stares being used a lot in Trials because they can kill someone even with an overshield if they have a headshot, so that's really nice. The raid machine gun, however, is kind of becoming questionable. Some people use it pretty adamantly. I like using it a lot. But a lot of people also use rocket launchers. Quite a ways back, I'd say about 2 to 3 months ago, we saw a rocket launcher drop that was part of the Gunsmith, where it had maximum velocity. It's a Suros rocket launcher. Had almost max velocity, almost max blast radius, and it came with grenades and horseshoes. And that was a really nice perk on it. On top of the fact that it also had javelin and warhead veneers to make sure blast radius was maxed out and velocity was almost maxed out. So overall, it's quite the overpowered rocket launcher, and you'll still see quite a few people use it today. I've gone through and leveled mine up to a very high light level, and quite frankly, I love it to death. However, I don't use it in Crucible very much, as I opt for swords. I really love using my swords in Crucible. You guys will see a lot of gameplay of me using swords in general. But that being said, I feel like the entire Mida multi-tool meta has sort of degenerated. I wouldn't even argue that there is a meta right now. There are certainly weapons that are better than other weapons, but you just see such a variety of weapons in Crucible right now, and I absolutely love that. You're going to go into a match, and every match is going to be different. You'll never come across the same match twice, just because people use such vastly different weapons. Now, that being said, there are still weapons that are going to be overused. The Last Word is a good example. The Mida multi-tool is still overused compared to a lot of weapons. There's an auto rifle from Trials of Osiris that is also quite heavily used, just because of its practicality and the fact that it's so simple to use. Of all the metagame weapons, it's probably one of the most used. But then again, you look at some other people, like me. I don't like using those weapons. Some of my favorite weapons are the First Curse, which is almost never used. I love that weapon, I love the way it feels, I love the way it plays. I love using the Hung Jury, which is actually considered a great PvE weapon. I love using it in PvP because I'm good at using it at long ranges with a short range scope. And I think that performs very, very well for me, on top of Triple Tap and Firefly being two of the most badass perks you can have. Anyway, now I'm going to move on to the current imbalance towards scout rifles. Typically, Destiny, what they do when they need to rebalance a meta is that they'll say, oh, this is horribly overpowered, let's nerf it to hell, and then at the same time buff something else. And I think that is the biggest flaw in their system, is that they will try to nerf something at the same time as buffing something else. You really need to do one or the other. Now, that being said, I don't think scout rifles are, quote, overpowered. I'd say comparatively everything else is just underpowered. Don't nerf scout rifles. Scout rifles are performing exactly as they should. They're doing just fine. They do not need a nerf. What needs to happen is everything else needs to be brought up to the same level. I'm particularly talking about auto rifles. Hand cannons are more or less okay for the time being. You see plenty of people using hand cannons and being successful. I typically go to hand cannons. Hand cannons and scout rifles are my go-to weapons, particularly the Aya's Luna, which I think is one of my favorite weapons. It's basically a mini Hawkmoon. That being said, autos and pulse rifles have sort of faded into the background. The only pulse rifle, if ever, that you see being used is the Nerwood's Mercy. Maybe the Spare Change 25 if someone was lucky enough to both get it to drop and have a good roll on it. Auto rifles, with the exception of the Trials of Osiris one, simply are not used, and they need to be put back into the game. The Iron Banner one is an interesting archetype, but due to the lower magazine size, it's not exactly useful for a high fire rate weapon. They need to have higher magazine sizes like the Trials of Osiris one. The Trials of Osiris auto rifle is basically a better version of the Iron Banner one. So that being said, I think we need to see an auto rifle buff all around. Now, moving on past the actual weapons themselves, Sunbreakers got nerfed pretty badly. They got nerfed in every aspect, from the armor they have, to the way their supers perform, to the way their grenades and melees perform. Now, I think there's one thing that they should not have taken away. Now, I will not disagree that Sunbreakers were horribly overpowered before. They were broken beyond all belief. They were basically every other super in the game mashed into one, with the exception of the Night Stalker, which is just too unique not to be mashed in. Anyway, I think they need to have higher tracking ability on the hammers. The tracking on the hammers needs to come back. They nerfed that a bit too hard. The rest is fine. The defense is fine right now. It's easy enough to kill one, but still feel like you're kind of a Super Saiyan Thor god when you're running around as a Sunbreaker. However, we need to have some tracking back, and it's a little bit too hard to aim the hammers, especially at anything beyond point-blank range. Not to mention, you basically more or less need to hit your opponent now to actually kill them. Now, what do I think needs to happen overall? I think we need new exotics. I think we need to have all those new exotics, especially the gear pieces, be introduced into the game so we can look at a new kind of meta. I'm really looking forward to two in particular. I'm really looking forward to the Thagamizers for the Striker Titan. I have never been a Titan player. I never liked playing as Titans. Titans seem incredibly basic to me. I don't like using them. But the Striker with the Thagamizers, where you can alternate between your super and your melee a lot, now that's an interesting concept. I like the idea of being able to do that, especially with the Overcharge perk going on. I think that's very cool, where you get your melee back after using it. That's a very interesting build, where it encourages people to use melee more often, which people don't typically have melee builds in Crucible. They have discipline builds or intellect builds. It's very rare to see a melee build like that, especially since a Titan can just use shoulder charge if they really want to have a melee ability. I'm not a big fan of shoulder charge. I'd just rather have the unstoppable perk on. Anyway, that being said, we need these new exotics. The other one I'm looking forward to, I believe it's pronounced the Acolyte verse, or Actualite verse. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but it's the one that's for the Warlock that increases your blink distance. I am super looking forward to that. That's going to be an interesting one to do. I think it'll put Blink back to the way it was and also make it a little bit better. It's a very interesting concept for an exotic, and I am very stoked for it. The final one that I'm actually really looking forward to is the Frost Ease for the Hunter. I am super looking forward to the abilities they've got on that. I think it'll be a very interesting way to play Crucible with those on as a Hunter. So basically, each class is getting a new really cool exotic. In fact, they're getting more than one apiece, but those are the ones that I thought I would highlight. The last thing I want to go over is just the concept of what a meta should be. Metas should be based around concepts, not the weapons themselves. Metas should be based around builds, not just one weapon or a set of weapons, like it has been up until this point. It's not so much that way anymore. Sure, there's some acceptable weapons to use that are really good, but you see a lot of people experimenting, and that's really cool. I appreciate that, and that's what the mark of a good game is, where there isn't like, you have to use one of these 10 weapons, or else you're not playing the game right. That's just not fun anywhere. Anyway, that being said, the idea of a concept is like, okay, let's have a melee build. I want to have a melee build, and that's what my meta is going to be. I'm going to go have my melee strength, but I want weapons that complement that. So I'm going to go with a hand cannon of some sort and a shotgun, so that I can get off one shot of either of them and then land the melee and get the kill. That's an example of a build. That's the example of what one sort of meta build could be. Now, there's another one that you could do where if you wanted to do like a sniper rifle grenade build, where you could have your grenade do some initial damage and then pick off with a sniper rifle, where it doesn't even matter if you have to land the headshot. It's the idea where you have a strategy and you build toward that strategy. That's what a meta should be. That's what a meta is. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to end it here. If you guys have any questions or comments, definitely post them in the comment section below. I will get back to you, and I will see you guys in the next video. Shadowlance out.